Okay, I think you can go.
Okay, wonderful. First of all, thank you everyone for attending my presentation today. As we've all gone throughout the semester in LABMP 590, a topic that has come up a little bit is mortality, human life, ideas about existentialism, and that kind of led me to the topic of cryonics. Now that might sound like sort of a big, scary, very sciencey word, but today in my presentation, I'd like to kind of take you through my own thought process as I kind of research this topic and learn about how it might relate to the technological singularity and how the field of cryonics might play out with AI and ASI. So to start off, I think it's necessary to have a little bit of a foundational understanding of what cryobiology is. So I'm sure we all understand that biology is the study of living things. Cryo might be a word that's a little bit more foreign to us. So the etymology of the word comes from the Greek cryos, which is icy cold or frost. So essentially anything that is cryo is to do with very low temperatures, sort of beyond the normal. So cryobiology is essentially the study of biological materials and systems at very, very low temperatures and sort of beyond what we would consider normal or just cold. Now to kind of give you an idea of how we might see cryobiology manifest in our everyday lives, I've kind of taken some examples of things that we encounter in our day-to-day lives that our friends and families go through to kind of show the role of cryobiology in society. So first of all, embryo freezing or baking. So as we know, in the modern world, there are many new technologies and options for individuals who are perhaps experiencing infertility, or trying to do some family planning and are looking for healthcare services related to that. So embryo freezing is a process where we use in vitro fertilization procedures to produce an embryo in the laboratory. We'll grow that embryo for a couple of days. I believe typically around a week is the standard for most clinics, and then that embryo is frozen. So by freezing it at very low temperatures, so typically that'll be in liquid nitrogen at a temperature of around negative 190 degrees Celsius, those embryos can essentially be frozen indefinitely. They can then be taken out and thawed whenever this individual or this couple is ready for the embryo to be transferred to the female partner, to be embedded in the uterus to undergo a pregnancy. So there are pretty beneficial outcomes associated with this embryo freezing. So survival rate for cryopreserved and thawed embryos is over 90%, which is actually greater than the survival rate of cryopreserved oocytes. Something that we might hear a lot about as well is sperm freezing or egg freezing. Those are also options, again, for infertility treatment. The advantage of embryo freezing is that because these embryos are a little bit more developed, tend to be a little bit hardier, they have a stronger structure, and that's why they have that improved post-thaw outcome compared to just the eggs by themselves. So what we see is that fresh and previously frozen embryos result in very similar outcomes for pregnancy, which is wonderful for the patients who are undergoing that process. There are so many applications for embryo freezing. Oftentimes, a woman or a couple are perhaps wanting to have children at a later stage in life, perhaps would like to focus on their careers at the moment. Perhaps they have undergone IVF and they've had a successful pregnancy, but because they've been able to produce multiple viable embryos through that one round, perhaps they want to store those embryos to have children at a later date. So there are a lot of options that become possible with this technology, and it's just one example of cryobiology and its implications in the modern world. Another technology that implicates cryobiology is cell banking. So it's becoming increasingly common to cryopreserve all sorts of cells, which are later used for cell therapy. So as we know, in the past, when a baby was born, we typically would just throw the umbilical cord away. It wasn't seen as a material of much value. But what we've learned in more recent times is that it's a very rich source of hematopoietic stem cell and progenitor cells, and those, of course, can be invaluable in all sorts of cell therapy treatments for all sorts of diseases and ailments. So if we can retrieve those cells at the time of birth, there's not always an immediate need or application for those cells. The baby might be born quite healthy and have no need for any sort of stem cell treatment. However, there's always the possibility of something arising in the future, or perhaps another child needing those stem cells in a different part of the world at a different time. So if we can bank these cells, which we do by freezing them, again in liquid nitrogen, they're stable, they can be stored for indefinite periods of time until the need for them arises, and then we can simply freeze them, and they're viable and very useful as a treatment. Cryoablation is another technique, again falling into the medical world. So essentially, this is when an extremely cold cryoprobe is applied to some sort of tissue that is unwanted. So, for example, it can be used to treat perhaps a wart. It's been used to treat several different types of cancer. The advantage of this sort of procedure is generally that it's quite minimally invasive. And so it has a lot of positive outcomes associated with it. Now, something that might be more familiar to all of you is cryotherapy. So again, that might sound like a very long, very jargon-esque scientific term, but essentially it just translates to cold therapy, because as we've talked about, cryo is just cold or icy or freezing. So cold therapy can be anything as simple as applying an ice pack to a sore or injured arm to help with pain management. There are also some more advanced forms of cryotherapy. One example is whole body cryotherapy. So essentially, as we can see on our screen here, it involves stepping into a chamber where you're at sub-zero temperatures with your whole body and your skin exposed to that. It is apparently associated with some health benefits, for example, for muscle soreness, for the appearance of the skin, the tightness of the skin. However, those benefits are not necessarily supported by the federal government. They're typically offered by private clinics or spas. So as we can see, although cryobiology certainly has applications and certainly has therapies and technologies that are very science-based, very research-based, there are also sort of these newer technologies, which we could perhaps call a pseudoscience, which haven't quite been proven yet, and are sort of just based on theories at the moment. So moving on, I'd like to talk about the current innovations that we have in cryobiology and things that we're currently working on and trying to improve. And what has sort of drawn my attention during my research process is whole organ cryopreservation. So something that is a relatively recent development, last summer, in the summer of 2023, researchers at the University of Minnesota were successfully able to perform a rat kidney transplantation with a kidney that was cryopreserved and then thawed. So this was really a groundbreaking achievement. In organ transplantation, our general procedure is typically to keep that organ on ice. This sort of prolongs the amount of time that we have to get it transferred to the new recipient. However, that time on ice is very limited. For something like a heart, it might just be a couple of hours. For something like a kidney, it might be around a day. So still quite limited. That limits how we're able to time the surgery if the patient's perhaps not able to get to the hospital in time, if we're not able to transport it to the correct center. That severely limits our options for treatment and for therapy. So the cryopreservation of organs is something that allows us a lot more flexibility. It allows us to store these organs, to build up a bank of organs, just like we build banks of cells and blood, so that they're widely available, so that we have this nice selection of choices from different donors that we can look through when we're looking for something for a recipient. And something that they used is vitrification. So something that's interesting about cryopreservation in the medical field is that as useful as a technology as it can be, there are a lot of limitations and a lot of dangers that are associated with it. So I'll kind of go into that. So first of all, there's cryo-injury. I think we can all imagine that if we are to perhaps stick our hand into a snowbank that's very cold, we're most likely to end up with frostbite. There are all sorts of dangers implicated there with that very low temperature. There's toxicity of the cryoprotectants. So to protect our tissues from these very low temperatures, we use special agents called cryoprotectants, which can protect them from ice crystal formation and all of those risks associated with cryo temperatures. However, the flip side of that is that many of those cryoprotectants are highly toxic, and so that kind of introduces a risk in itself. There's also the uneven thawing of larger masses. So typically when we are retrieving an organ or cells, we want to thaw them very quickly. We want to be able to get that cryoprotectant out of the cells. We want to be able to transfer it to a recipient right away. However, with larger masses, so with a large organ like perhaps a large intestine or a liver, because it's such a large mass, there's uneven thawing. So perhaps the cells on the outside thaw quite quickly and do quite well, but because the cells on the inside of the organ are thawing more slowly, we're not quite able to preserve the quality, and so in that way the organ is not really viable after thawing. There's also the fracturing, shattering, and damage of organs in general. In many past experiments and research procedures, what we've seen is that when we don't have an optimized freezing technique and an optimized thawing technique, there can be these fracturing and shattering injuries to organs. This is not so much an issue that we see with cells, but with these organs, because they're more complex structures, there's more factors to keep in mind. So there are several technologies and several techniques that are being incorporated into these cryopreservation technologies to kind of overcome these barriers. So one is optimized perfusion and cryoprotectants. This simply means that for every different type of tissue and organ, there might be a certain agent, a certain cryoprotectant that it's a little bit less sensitive to, that it is maybe slightly less toxic, so that can be a viable solution. The perfusion method, so just making sure that we are able to introduce the cryoprotectant to the tissue, to the organ, in an optimized, even way. Vitrification is a type of freezing process where we're able to freeze this solid organ or these cells or these tissue fragments to a solid-like state that's not crystalline in structure. So we're freezing them very quickly so that essentially the particles don't have the time to form that crystalline ice structure, which can be damaging. Instead, they're sort of an amorphous or glass-like solid structure. Something that the researchers at the University of Minnesota use is nanoboardings. So they use special nanoparticles when they were perfusing the organs with the cryoprotectants. And then when they retrieve that organ for thawing, they were able to use a special magnetic field to allow for very even thawing, so taking away that issue of uneven thawing. So the implications of whole organ cryopreservation, thawing, and transplantation for the immediate future are just as we discussed previously. So essentially, it would allow us greater flexibility in scheduling. We could perhaps even have surgeries delayed to the morning instead of having to have them in the middle of the night, which I'm sure no patients or staff would complain about. We could bank a greater pool of donor organs if we're not able to match a donor organ to a recipient right away. It doesn't have to go to waste. It can simply go in storage until an appropriate recipient kind of shows up. And so in that way, we're building this bank, and overall our process of organ transplantation is becoming more efficient. So now that we've talked about kind of the actual technologies that we see today and things that we're working on and that are very close to our immediate future, what does the more distant future of cryobiology look like? And is it as cool as media would suggest? So to kind of look at what the future of cryobiology might look like, I've taken some inspiration from media and specifically from science fiction. In many science fiction novels or films, we often see that characters are cryopreserved in a state of cryosleep, which allows them to kind of leave a state of consciousness so that they can travel great distances for a great amount of time, for perhaps galactic or intergalactic travel, so that can be seen in popular films like Space Odyssey, classic, or more modern films like Passengers. Like we talked about with that last technology, with cryopreservation, a human body can potentially transverse great amounts of time and sort of be revived during a more optimal time. So again, we've seen this in a couple of films. In the film Iceman from 1984, a man from millennia ago is thought and seen to be viable. And that kind of brings up dilemmas of how he can fit into this new modern society and how he goes about navigating that. So those are all kind of potential paths that we might see for cryopreservation in our own future. So now that we've had a little bit of a background about what cryobiology looks like today and what it might look like in the near and distant future, let's talk about cryonics, which has been the focus of my presentation. So essentially, cryonics is the freezing of a whole human body or head after death, with the hope that by preserving the body or the head at low temperatures, they can at some point in the future be thawed, be brought back to life at a point where science has evolved, and where we have technologies and therapies that are available to somehow revive this person and guarantee them a good, high quality of life. So there are a couple of private institutions that offer this service. One example is the Cryonics Institute. So they oversee long-term care of the frozen human body for a cost, of course. At the moment, they have about 250 bodies stored, and that accounts for about half of the bodies in the world. It's estimated that there are about 500 human bodies frozen cryogenically at this moment in time. The Alcor Life Extension Foundation is another popular North American option. So they are offering neurocryonics, so they are freezing just a head. The thought behind that is that freezing just the head allows for less resource use, it's more efficient, more cost effective, and at this potential point in the future when the heads are being thawed, we somehow have the medicine and technologies for regenerative processes that can build the body back. So the question here that I've kind of pursued with my research is cryonics the future of our society? Can all of these 500 people who are currently frozen be resurrected at some point in the future, or are they just corpuscles, which is kind of a morbid term that's commonly used through media that I came across in my research. Now, there are many critics of cryogenics. The Society for Cryobiology states that cryostasis, so the process of freezing your body or your head after death, is an act of speculation or hope, not science, simply because we don't have any research, we don't have any indication at the moment that proves that we will be able to successfully thaw and revive these people who are frozen in the future. That being said, as we've learned this semester, the capabilities of artificial intelligence, or AI, are far beyond what our own capabilities are. And with the approach of artificial superintelligence, or ASI in particular, we can perhaps make the conclusion or the prediction that ASI may be indeed capable of developing the necessary technology for freezing and thawing people, for really implementing cryostasis as a normal day-to-day procedure. However, the question then becomes, if ASI does become autonomous after a technological singularity, if it becomes a steward for the Earth, as Dr. Sutton has suggested, would AI deem cryonics to be a suitable and morally correct technology if it's concerned with other aspects of the Earth, perhaps stewardship of the environment, rights of animals? What's morally correct? Will cryonics fall under that description? The other question is, with ASI aiding advancement in other fields and technologies, will there really be a demand for cryonics? So if we have the technologies to heal us today, is there really any point in freezing ourselves in hopes of living out a new second life in some distant future that is infinitely improved? So there are definitely some moral dilemmas that come with the question of cryogenics and cryostasis that I'd like to discuss with you all today. First of all, there's the issue of autonomy versus beneficence. So with the cardinal ethics of the medical field today, we can kind of try to strive to find a balance between autonomy and beneficence. But in some distant future where cryostasis can be successfly undergone, and every dead body becomes something that can potentially be revived and be viable, is it more important to attend to beneficence and try to freeze that body so that we can maybe revive that person, extend their life, have them return to society at a future point where society is advanced and they can have a higher quality of life? Is that our priority? Or is our priority perhaps to wish their autonomy? Perhaps they did not want to be revived. And perhaps even with the potential of becoming viable again at some point in the future, they would like to have a traditional death, perhaps undergo burial, or cremation, or something along those lines that does sort of eliminate any future potential for viability. There's also the question of evading morality. If we have the guarantee or the understanding with ASI that cryostasis is indeed successful, will people perhaps be motivated to end their lives early in the hopes that they can attempt a second life at some point in the future where with exponential growth, ASI has advanced our society to beyond what we can imagine in the present? I'm sure we can all understand that ASI is predicted to have exponential growth. So no matter how advanced a state we might be at in the future, the people of the future and the generations of the future might have even higher hopes for a more optimized and utopian society. So would they be perhaps motivated to undergo medically assisted death and then be cryopreserved so that they can come back at some second points in life? There's also the question of resource allocation. As we can imagine, cryostasis is something that's quite costly, that's resource intensive. So who will be cryopreserved upon death and who will be revived? Finally, there's the issue of mankind playing God. Will we be willing to let go of cultural and religious traditions and rituals that we hold in regards to death and morality to embrace the extension of life that's offered by cryogenics? For example, many cultures may believe that it's necessary to undergo a burial or a cremation to have a chance at an afterlife or some sort of alternate world or system. If we have the chance to prolong our lives in this world, would we take that? So as I've navigated throughout my research here, my final verdict on the field of cryonics and whether it's something that's here to stay and will play a significant role in our future is that I feel that the field of cryopreservation will continue to be quite strong for the next 50 years or so. I do believe that we're quite close to achieving whole human cryopreservation, thawing, and transplant, especially with the impending introduction of AGI and ASI. I think our research processes and our developmental processes will be sped up, and I do believe that it'll become a practice that's quite commonplace, again, within the next 50 years or so. However, I do think it will coexist with other sorts of technologies, so xenotransplantation, regenerative medicine, and bioengineering. As to which technology will be most common, which will be most efficient or cost-effective, it's hard to say, but I do believe that they'll all play some sort of role in the future. I'll also comment that I think the realization of the technological singularity and AI command or stewardship of the Earth will probably outpace the development of successful whole body or head human cryopreservation and thawing. I think we do need that role and that intelligence of AGI or ASI to achieve whole body or whole head cryopreservation. But as we discussed earlier, will ASI deem that technology to be something that's worthy of its time and something that it will like to pursue? Additionally, will we be pushing demand for that technology? If AI is creating all sorts of other technologies that are already improving our qualities of life in the present, will we really have a motivation to see a second life in the future? I do believe that the practice of cryopreserving our dead loved ones may become a commonplace funeral practice similar to burial or cremation that is performed more so for symbolic reasons and represents our values as a more futuristic society, rather than out of a genuine belief or desire to be revived at some point. I think that in the present day and in the past, to exist the question of morality and our existence, humans have often turned to perhaps religion or spirituality. We take comfort perhaps in the idea of an afterlife, perhaps a heaven and hell, perhaps punishment, a day of retribution, or a day of being rewarded for our good tasks. And that's why we've associated all sorts of burial ceremonies, common practices with death. As we advance in society and as AI kind of transforms the way we live our lives, optimizes our lives, extends our lives, I don't think that innate human fear of death will go away. I think we'll confront it in different ways. So although we might be quite well aware that we are not freezing our bodies with the intention of coming back at any point, it might be a symbolic gesture to represent our hope for being revived at some point and for the immorality of mankind, if not the immorality of a single person. So with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. I'd be very happy to hear any comments or questions.
Great. Yeah, I think that this is a hard area to talk about because it does mix true science and pseudoscience. And Edmonton is one of the centers in cryobiology science excellence, you know. But I think one thing that's clear is the way bodies have been frozen up until now, even if artificial superintelligence greatly improves things where you can freeze entire bodies without damage, that isn't being done now. So those people who are already frozen probably cannot be brought back in any way. So it's kind of a type of fraud to charge people for something that's not really helping them. It's just prolonging a kind of speculative hope that really you can't make good on. So, Yeah, yeah, so that's how that works. So any questions from you guys?
Do you think that there is a issue in terms of hygiene? Or do you know if anything is being done to look at hygiene or bacteria growth when thawing these bodies, if they were ever to be thawed?
Sure. That's a great question. And something I did consider during my research was that if you have an immune system that's adapted to the current, will it be able to protect you at some point in the future when there's all sorts of different diseases running around? At the same time, would you pose a threat to the people of the future? I don't see that as something that's being addressed by the current institutes that perform this cryostasis. If I can kind of go back to my old slide. So both the Cryonics Institute and Alpro Life Extension, they have performed some preliminary thawing experiments with, I suppose, some bodies that were not accounted for anymore, weren't being paid for anymore. Generally, those processes were quite unsuccessful. They had fractures, cracking, all sorts of damage in all tissues and organs. So I suppose that because they're so early in the process of trying to successfully implement cryostasis, the aspect of immune systems, of hygiene, like you mentioned, is not something they've addressed so far. It's definitely an important factor.
So you can imagine a sort of intermediate circumstance where we understand how to freeze better, but still not well enough, where you'd be able to brought back to consciousness, but have these huge breaks in skin and muscle everywhere that would be worse than being dead, right? I think it would be probably, yeah. So, but it's kind of interesting. There, in most ways of trying to do it, the rabbit kidney is about the limit of what you can successfully freeze and bring back, but you can't reliably do it. It's like 3 times out of 7 that, and you can't figure out what you did different in those 3 times where you are successful versus the others where you weren't. So, and of course, what good is it to us to bring back something of that size? I mean, so, but that's kind of where it stands. And I think luckily for us, we're very far from the headquarters of the cryonics organizations, right? And we're close to the headquarters of the cryobiology, respected research, and they've done a lot of things that are very valuable for the long term of the human race. Yeah. So anyway, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah. All righty.